In the quiet village of Luaze, nestled between rolling hills and the whispering riverbanks of Africa, lived a man named Kofi, who was known for his gentle demeanor and unwavering honesty. His life was simple, consisting of daily trips to the market, tending to his small plot of land, and spending evenings with his wife, Ama, whose soft laughter brightened even the dullest days. To the villagers, Ama appeared as nothing more than a modest, hard-working woman, content with their humble home and simple meals of cassava and yams. Yet beneath her quiet exterior, she harbored a secret that even Kofi could not imagine. She was a billionaire, the heir to a vast fortune acquired through generations of shrewd investments and ancestral wealth, which she had kept hidden, choosing instead to live as an ordinary villager to protect Kofi from envy, greed, and the complications of immense wealth. Kofi, unaware of her true identity, often marveled at her humility and kindness, attributing it to her upbringing and the strength of character that had been instilled in her by her late parents. Every morning, as he walked through the dusty lanes to the marketplace, he would notice Ama tending to her small garden with meticulous care, smiling at neighbors, helping children with their chores, and feeding stray animals with a generosity that spoke louder than words. She would always insist that their happiness lay not in riches, but in the bonds they shared and the community that nurtured them, a philosophy that Kofi embraced wholeheartedly, never suspecting that the polished silver bangles on her wrists were a subtle reminder of the hidden treasures that lay in the vaults of distant cities, waiting silently for the day they would be revealed. Life flowed peacefully, marked by the rhythmic chanting of market traders, the scent of ripe mangoes, and the distant songs of the river, as if nature itself celebrated their quiet love. Yet beneath this calm, a storm of unforeseen events was preparing to surface, destined to challenge Kofi's perceptions, redefine their relationship, and unveil Ama's concealed empire in ways that would shake the very foundation of their simple existence. For one evening, during a village celebration, when Ama accidentally received a letter meant for her private accountants, Kofi glimpsed the first hint of a reality far beyond the pastoral simplicity they had always known. A revelation that would not only expose Ama's fortune, but also force him to confront his own values, loyalty, and the true meaning of wealth. And as the sun set behind the golden horizon, casting elongated shadows across the village, Kofi felt a flutter of curiosity and apprehension, unaware that the journey he was about to embark on would traverse lands, hearts, and secrets deeper than any river flowing through Luaze. The following morning, Kofi awoke to the familiar sounds of the village rooster and the soft murmur of the river. Yet something in the air felt different, as if the universe itself had shifted subtly overnight, carrying with it the scent of secrets waiting to be discovered. Ama had left early, humming a tune that seemed to dance between joy and restraint. And as Kofi prepared for the day's errands, he noticed a finely embossed envelope partially hidden under the straw mat at their doorstep, its gold seal catching the early sunlight like a beacon of mystery. Curiosity prickled at him, but instinct told him to leave it alone, for he knew Ama valued discretion and seldom allowed outsiders, or even him, to peek into her private affairs. Yet the human heart is drawn to secrets, and Kofi's mind, a swirling storm of wonder and caution, eventually overcame his hesitation. He carefully lifted the envelope, feeling the weight of paper thicker than ordinary letters, the scent of leather and old ink hinting at importance beyond the village correspondence he was accustomed to. Inside, he found documents written in precise, formal handwriting, listing figures so vast, so unimaginable, that his mind struggled to comprehend them, numbers that dwarfed the combined wealth of the neighboring towns, properties spanning distant cities, and intricate portfolios that suggested not mere fortune but a legacy of empires carefully maintained over generations. Kofi's heart raced, pounding against the walls of his chest as he realized that the woman he had loved for years, the one whose laughter had been his daily joy, whose hands had tilled the soil and tended the fire, had been living a double life of unimaginable wealth, hidden behind the guise of simplicity and humility. Conflicting emotions surged within him: pride, amazement, disbelief, and an almost guilty shame for never suspecting, for taking her modest demeanor at face value. He remembered every small kindness, every gesture of generosity, and wondered how much of it had been truly selfless, and how much had been informed by her secret means. Yet even as doubts flickered like shadows at dusk, he knew in the depths of his heart that Ama's character had remained pure, untainted by the gold she could so easily wield. For her wealth had never changed her devotion to family, her concern for neighbors, and her love for Kofi. As he pondered these revelations, Ama returned, her eyes meeting his with the same warmth and calm he had always known, unaware that he had glimpsed a fraction of her hidden world. And the conversation that followed was delicate and surreal, a dance of emotions, questions, and careful explanations, revealing her motives for secrecy, her desire to protect him from the pitfalls of envy and greed, and her wish to ensure that their love was built on shared values, not shared wealth. By the time the sun reached its zenith, casting brilliant light over the village, Kofi felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and the trembling weight of new understanding. For the life he thought he knew had expanded beyond the horizons of the hills, rivers, and modest homes around them, and in that moment he recognized that their journey together would now traverse a realm of fortune and responsibility, requiring wisdom, trust, and courage to navigate the uncharted waters of a hidden empire finally unveiled. Ama sensed the shift in Kofi long before he uttered a word. For although he tried to hide the trembling in his hands and the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a woman who had spent years studying human nature, both in dusty villages and in boardrooms of towering cities, could read him as easily as the morning sky. And she knew that the moment she had feared had finally arrived. As they sat beneath the shade of the old baobab tree, where they had shared countless meals and whispered their dreams in simpler times, Ama gathered her breath, steadying herself for a truth she could no longer run from. Kofi, clutching the envelope he had found, struggled between confrontation and compassion, unsure whether to be angry for the deception or grateful for the love that had shaped it. His voice trembled as he finally asked her why she had hidden a fortune that could have changed their lives, why she had chosen a life of simplicity despite possessing wealth beyond imagination, why she had remained silent when he worked tirelessly to provide for them, sometimes skipping meals just to save a few coins. Ama listened without interruption, her expression gentle yet shadowed with the weight of memories she had tried to bury. And when she finally spoke, her words flowed like a river released after years behind a dam. She revealed how her family's wealth had attracted danger all her life, how greedy relatives, corrupt officials, and distant business partners had once tried to control her, manipulate her, or use her fortune for their own desires, forcing her to flee the city and rebuild her life somewhere no one would think to look for a billionaire heiress. She explained that when she met Kofi humble, honest, hard-working, and kind, he had become the first person who loved her without expectation, without calculation, without seeing her as a vessel of riches. And it was that purity that she had desperately wanted to preserve. Her voice cracked as she described sleepless nights spent wondering whether she should tell him, wanting to trust him, yet terrified of shattering the peaceful world they had built together. Kofi listened, emotions swirling like a whirlwind hurt, empathy, confusion, and a strange, growing admiration as he realized the depth of fear she had carried alone for years. The burden of wealth that had never once made her arrogant, but instead made her fearful of losing the only genuine love she had ever known. Still, he couldn't shake the sting of betrayal. For secrets, no matter how noble their reasons, have sharp edges. And this one had cut deep into the fabric of their marriage. They sat in heavy silence as the village around them continued with its usual rhythm, children laughing in the distance, women pounding yam in wooden mortar, goats bleating as they wandered freely, all unaware that beneath the baobab tree, a marriage balanced between two worlds, poverty and abundance, truth and concealment, fear and love. After what felt like hours, Kofi finally reached for Ama's hand, and although his touch was hesitant, it was not rejecting. He told her that he didn't care about the money, that he never married her for riches or status, but he needed honesty if they were to walk forward together. For a house built on secrets could not withstand even the gentlest storm. Ama nodded, tears glistening like tiny pearls along her lashes, promising that from this day onward she would no longer hide any part of her life from him. Yet neither of them knew that this confession, instead of ending the storm, would only mark its beginning. For far beyond the village, in a distant city where Ama's name still lingered in the whispers of powerful people, someone had discovered her location at last. Someone who had been waiting for years for the perfect moment to reclaim what they believed belonged to them. And the revelation would soon descend upon Luazi like thunder rolling over a quiet savanna. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long amber streaks across the village, Ama and Kofi walked home in thoughtful silence, unaware that far beyond the familiar fields and huts of Luazi, a black SUV sped down a dusty road toward them, its tinted windows concealing a man whose life had been shaped by greed, resentment, and a burning obsession with reclaiming Ama's hidden empire. This man, known in the city as Baruti, the broker, had once been Ama's late father's trusted financial advisor until a web of corruption unraveled his career after being exposed for siphoning money from the family's accounts. He had spent years rebuilding his influence in the shadows, always waiting for the perfect moment to strike back against the heiress who had unknowingly ruined him. For years he had searched for her, tracking old records, questioning former employees, bribing informants, and trailing rumors that drifted from village to village like dust on the wind. And when he finally discovered a hint of her presence in Luazi through a banker's careless slip, He knew he had found his opportunity. Meanwhile, AMA prepared dinner in their small kitchen, moving with a calm grace that belied the emotional turmoil of the day. While Kofi sat outside on a wooden stool, staring at the river and replaying every moment of their conversation, beneath the baobab tree, trying to make peace between his love for AMA and the shock of discovering a world so much bigger than the one he had always known. He didn't resent her fortune, nor the life of simplicity they had lived. What unsettled him was the sudden feeling of vulnerability, the awareness that the woman he loved was tied to a universe of power and danger that he had never even imagined. As the scent of roasted plantains drifted from the kitchen, Kofi rose to help AMA, but before he could step inside, a distant rumble echoed across the village. The unmistakable sound of a powerful engine cutting through the quiet evening. The villagers turned, murmuring in confusion, for Luazi rarely saw vehicles, let alone one as sleek and ominous as the black SUV that now rolled slowly past the muddy paths, its tires crushing gravel with deliberate menace. Children froze mid-play, elders exchanged wary glances, and curious eyes followed the vehicle as it stopped directly in front of Kofi and AMA's home. Ama stepped out from the kitchen, her face draining of color the moment she saw the man emerging from the cartall, dressed in an immaculate suit that contrasted violently with the dusty village landscape, his cold eyes locking onto her with a familiarity that made Kofi's heartbeat thrum with dread. "Ama," the man said, with a thin smile that carried no warmth. "You've been hiding for a very long time." Kofi instinctively stepped forward, placing himself between them, his voice steady despite the uncertainty rising within him as he demanded to know who the stranger was and why he had come. Baruti chuckled darkly, as though amused by the idea that someone like Kofi could stand in his way, and he introduced himself with chilling confidence, explaining that he was there to discuss unfinished business, a phrase that made Ama tremble because she knew exactly what he meant. She had hoped her past would never catch up to her in Luazi, but Baruti's presence confirmed her worst fear. He had come to seize control of her fortune, using intimidation, manipulation, or whatever force he deemed necessary. The villagers watched from a distance, whispering among themselves, sensing danger, but unsure how to intervene. AMA stepped forward, her voice steady but edged with desperation, telling Baruti that she had left that life behind and owed him nothing. But Baruti responded with threats that sent a chill through the warm evening air, reminding her that he knew every detail of her assets, her inheritance, and the legal loopholes that could tie her hands if she resisted. When Kofi attempted to speak again, Baruti dismissed him with a wave of his hand, calling him a farmer playing husband to a queen, a comment that struck Kofi like a blade, not because of the insult itself, but because of the cruel way it dismissed the simple life he cherished. Before leaving, Baruti issued a final warning. He would return in 3 days, and AMA must decide whether to cooperate or face consequences that would stretch far beyond Luazi. As the SUV roared away, kicking up clouds of dust that blurred the village's view, AMA collapsed onto the nearest stool, her body shaking, not from fear alone, but from the crushing realization that the peaceful world she had built with Kofi was now under threat. And Kofi, kneeling beside her, understood that the simplicity he had always known was gone forever, replaced by a storm they would have to face together whether they were ready or not. That night, long after the village sank into silence and the moon stretched its pale glow across the thatched rooftops, Ama and Kofi sat inside their small home with the door locked and the lamps dimmed, both weighed down by a tense, unspoken fear that clung to the air like thick mist. Ama's hands trembled as she recounted every detail of her past, her father's empire built from rare mineral exports, global investments, and stakes in multinational companies. Her mother's hidden trust funds scattered across banks from Accra to London, the family, lawyers, board members, and silent partners who had once depended on her signature for billion-dollar decisions. She described how Baruti had infiltrated that world, charming her father with polished promises while secretly siphoning wealth through forged documents and ghost accounts, and how, when his scheme was uncovered, he swore revenge on the heiress who refused to protect him. As Ama spoke, Kofi listened with growing astonishment, realizing that the woman he believed he fully knew was tied to a world he had never even glimpsed, one where wealth did not guarantee safety, but instead invited predators who fed on power. Yet even as he felt overwhelmed, his heart softened when he looked at her tear-streaked face, remembering how she had lived beside him in the village without ever once revealing her lineage, never flaunting her riches, eating the same food, walking the same dusty roads, and honoring the same traditions he did. She had chosen simplicity not because she lacked options, but because she yearned for peace. Still, the reality that her past had finally found her terrified him, and he knew that facing Baruti alone would be impossible. Ama confessed that she feared Baruti had more than intimidation at his disposal. He controlled offshore lawyers, corrupt police units, and a network of men who carried out his orders without question, meaning that if he wanted to seize her fortune or force her signature on fraudulent transfers, he would not hesitate to use threats, manipulation, or even harm. Kofi's mind raced with a mix of anxiety and resolve as he considered the danger looming just 3 days away. He wondered whether they should flee the village, disappear into another region, or seek legal help in the city. But Ama shook her head, explaining that running would only make them easier targets, and the city was where Baruti held the most influence. For a moment, Kofi felt powerless, a simple farmer facing a storm far beyond his reach. Yet, as he looked at Emma's frightened eyes, something protective ignited inside him, a determination stronger than any fear. He told her firmly that whatever happened, they would face it together. For marriage was not a bond of peace alone, but a bond forged for storms as well. Inspired by his confidence, Ama revealed something she had never shared with anyone in Luazi, a hidden safe buried beneath the floorboards of their home, containing documents, birth certificates, equity shares, original bank codes, and legal deeds that proved her ownership of the family empire. If Baruti obtained any of these, he could attempt hostile takeovers and drain accounts legally. So protecting the safe became their first priority. Together they lifted the wooden planks and retrieved a heavy iron box sealed with a coded lock. As Ama opened it, the dim lantern light reflected off stacks of embossed certificates, foreign currency, and leather-bound ledgers worth more than anything Luazi had ever seen. Kofi stared in awe, struggling to comprehend how such immense wealth had been sleeping beneath the same floor where he placed his sandals each night. They decided that the documents needed to be moved somewhere safer before Baruti returned. An AMA suggested the old shrine hidden in the forest, a sacred place untouched by outsiders and known only to a few elders. As they packed the documents into woven baskets and extinguished their lamps to avoid drawing attention, a sudden knock on the door froze them in place. The knock was soft, hesitant, almost fearful, and when Kofi slowly opened the door, he found Niafa village's oldest widow standing with a lantern in her hand and worry etched on her face. She warned them that she had overheard unfamiliar voices near the riverbank earlier, men speaking in low tones and describing the woman with the fortune, and she urged them to be careful because strangers did not wander into Luazi without purpose. Ama's heartbeat quickened as she realized Baruti's men were already scouting the area, perhaps preparing for his return. With no time to lose, Ama and Kofi thanked Nia and stepped into the night, clutching the baskets tightly as they made their way toward the forest path, guided only by moonlight and the desperate hope that the shrine would protect the secrets Baruti sought to steal. The forest loomed before them like a living silhouette, its tall acacia trees swaying gently beneath the moonlight as Ama and Kofi hurried along the narrow dirt path, each carrying a basket heavy with documents that held the power to either save their future or doom it entirely if they fell into the wrong hands. The night air shimmered with the sounds of crickets and distant owls, but beneath those natural whispers lingered a chilling sense that unseen eyes were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ama clutched her basket close to her chest, her breaths shallow but determined, while Kofi walked slightly ahead, every muscle in his body alert, listening for every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves that might signal danger. The shrine lay deep within the forest, hidden behind walls of thick vines and ancient trees, a place the elders said was protected by ancestral spirits, who watched over the land long before kingdoms rose and fell. The villagers rarely visited it, except during harvest blessings or funerals of revered elders, and only a handful of people knew its exact location. By choosing it as the hiding place for AMA's secrets, Kofi hoped they were placing their trust not just in nature, but in something older and stronger than Baruti's greed. After almost an hour of cautious walking, the path opened into a small clearing illuminated by shafts of moonlight breaking through the dense canopy. There, in the center, stood the shrine, a circular stone structure carved with ancient symbols, its walls cracked with age, yet radiating a quiet strength that felt almost supernatural. AMA paused at the edge, overwhelmed by a mixture of awe and fear, for she had never imagined that her billion-dollar inheritance would one day depend on a place as sacred and humble as this. As they approached, the air felt heavier, as though the ancestors themselves were observing their steps. Kofi knelt and placed his palm against the cool stone, whispering a brief prayer for protection, both for the documents and for the life he and AMA hoped to save. Inside, the shrine was dim but spacious, lit faintly by the moon filtering through small openings in the roof. Its floor was covered in dried leaves, and in the center stood a carved wooden altar shaped like a guardian spirit. Ama hesitated before placing her basket at its base, feeling a strange pull in her chest as if entrusting her family legacy to the shrine meant accepting that her past and future were now bound to forces beyond human control. Together, She and Kofi arranged the documents behind a loose stone slab near the altar, careful to secure every sheet, every certificate, and every ledger. When they finally stepped back, a deep sense of relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. For at that very moment a distant crack echoed through the forest, loud enough to break the night's stillness, sharp enough to freeze the blood in their veins. Kofi grabbed Emma's arm, motioning her to stay silent as he extinguished their lantern and pulled her into the shadows. Through the leaves, the faint glow of flashlights flickered between the trees, weaving closer like hungry wolves stalking prey. Emma felt her heartbeat thundering in her ears as she whispered that Baruti's men must have followed them. But Kofi shook his head and insisted they remain hidden until the intruders passed, praying the shrine's ancient guardians would conceal their presence. The flashlights grew brighter, voices grew clearer, 3 men whispering urgently, one of them describing AMA in detail as though he had memorized her every feature. Panic surged through her, but Kofi's grip on her hand steadied her trembling. As the men approached the clearing, one of them stepped forward and shone his light directly onto the shrine. He muttered something about checking inside, and Amma felt the world spin, her lungs tightening with dread. But just as the man began to step toward the entrance, a sudden, sharp gust of wind swept through the clearing, shaking the trees and scattering leaves in a swirling spiral that extinguished their flashlights and sent the men stumbling back in alarm. Their terrified voices rose as they claimed the shrine was cursed, watched by spirits who punished trespassers. Within seconds, they retreated into the forest, running so fast their footsteps faded almost instantly. Amma clung to Kofi, overwhelmed by relief and awe, whispering that the ancestors had protected them, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of spiritual strength, embracing her like a shield. But the danger was not gone, not yet. They hurried out of the shrine and back toward the village, knowing the 3 days Baruti had given them were nearly over and that the next confrontation would be unavoidable. As they stepped out of the forest, the eastern sky began to glow with the first hints of dawn, and Kofi knew one thing with absolute certainty: the battle for AMA's future and their survival had only just begun. By the time the sun climbed fully over the horizon, washing the village in warm gold, AMA and Kofi had barely slept. Their minds waited with dread as they prepared for the moment Baruti would return to demand what he believed belonged to him. The villagers, sensing the tension that clung to the air like thick smoke, watched the couple with quiet concern. For rumors of the mysterious SUV and the men in the forest had already spread like wildfire from hut to hut. Nia, the old widow, arrived at their doorstep at dawn with a bowl of hot porridge and whispered prayers for their safety, while several elders gathered under the baobab tree, discussing the stranger who dared to bring danger into peaceful Luazi. Yet, despite the support around them, Emma felt a deep ache within her chest, a familiar heaviness she had carried since childhood. Whenever trouble from her wealthy past threatened to poison the life she wanted to build, Kofi noticed the distant look in her eyes and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, reminding her that they had survived the forest, the shrine, and Baruti's men, proof that they were stronger than fear. Still, as midday approached, Emma felt the world tightening around her like a tightening rope. Every passing second, a reminder that time was no longer a friend. The sky shifted from soft blue to a harsh, expectant brightness. the kind of light that precedes a storm even when there are no clouds. Villagers retreated indoors, children were called home early, and the marketplace quieted until only the goats remained wandering lazily between empty stalls. Then, just as the wind stilled and the heat pressed down in suffocating waves, the deep growl of a powerful engine echoed from the distant steady, slow, deliberate, like a predator announcing its arrival. Kofi and Ama stepped outside, fingers intertwined. As the black SUV emerged once again on the muddy road, flanked this time by a second vehicle carrying Barudi's men, the sight sent a ripple of fear through the village. Doors closing, curtains drawn, worried eyes peeking through small openings. The SUVs stopped directly in front of Kofi and Ama, their engines cutting abruptly, leaving behind an eerie silence thick enough to make the earth feel still. Barudi stepped out, dressed in another immaculate suit, sunglasses glinting under the sun, his expression calm but triumphant as though victory had already been claimed. He approached them slowly, his shadow stretching across the ground like a creeping serpent. "Ama," he said, his voice smooth but venomous. "I trust you've had enough time to think." Ama stood tall, despite the tremor in her breath, replying that she owed him nothing and that her father's legacy was not something he could steal through fear. Barudi chuckled, looking around at the humble village with cold amusement, then leaned closer and whispered that she was naive to think she could hide behind mud huts and uneducated farmers. Kofi stepped forward, anger burning in his chest, demanding that Barudi leave their home and threatening to involve the authorities, even though he knew the city police were likely in Barudi's pocket. Barudi simply smirked and snapped his fingers, signaling his men to bring forward a thick briefcase. He opened it to reveal forged documents, fake signatures, altered deeds, and legal traps designed to trick courts into believing Ama had willingly transferred her wealth to him. He declared that she would sign the final set of papers, or he would destroy everything she cared about: her village, her peace, her identity, and ensure she spent the rest of her life running. Ama's stomach twisted as the past she had fled tried once again to cage her. But before she could speak, the elders of Luazi stepped out from behind the baobab tree. One by one, they formed a protective line around Ama and Kofi, their faces stern, their canes planted firmly into the earth like ancient roots. Elder Makana, the oldest among them, raised her voice and said that no outsider had the right to threaten a daughter of their community. If Barudi wanted to harm Ama, he would have to step over the entire village. Barudi scoffed, unthreatened by the show of unity. Until something unexpected happened. Nia, the old widow, stepped into the center and raised her wrinkled hand. She revealed that she recognized Barudi from the early morning when his men wandered near the river, frightened by the angry spirits of the forest. At this, several villagers gasped, whispering among themselves, and Barudi's face twitched, his confidence cracking for the first time. Sensing the moment, Ama stepped forward and declared loudly that the shrine had rejected Barudi's men because the ancestors protected those who stood in truth. The villagers murmured with awe, some touching their amulets, others nodding in belief. Barudi's men shifted uneasily, exchanging anxious glances, for even the most hardened hearts feared the spirits of Luazi's sacred forest. Barudi tried to regain control, shouting that he feared no spirits, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Kofi, emboldened by the village's support, warned Baruti that if he took one more step toward Ama, the entire forest and the people of Luazi would rise against him. The tension reached a breaking point. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. And then, as if on cue, a sudden, violent gust of wind tore through the village, swirling dust into the air and making Baruti stumble backward. The villagers gasped, some praising the ancestors, others chanting softly under their breath. Baruti, shaken and unable to hide it, realized that this place, this land, this spirit was not his battlefield. With a furious scowl, he snapped his briefcase shut. The engines roared back to life, and the SUVs sped away, leaving behind nothing but dust and the echo of a confrontation that could have destroyed everything. As silence returned, Ama collapsed into Kofi's arms, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude as the villagers gathered around them, embracing them as family. For the first time in days, Ama felt genuinely protected, not by wealth, not by documents, but by a community that saw her as one of their own. Yet, even as the dust settled and the danger faded, Kofi knew one truth that lingered heavily in his heart. Baruti might have retreated, but he was not defeated, and the final storm had yet to arrive. As the dust settled over the crimson horizon of the savannah and the echoes of the village, drums faded into the warm African dusk, Kwaku found himself standing at the edge of the old baobab tree, staring at the leather-bound chest. His late wife, Ama, had left behind one last piece of her hidden world he had yet to open. One final truth she wanted him to discover when he was ready. And now, after the whirlwind of revelations, betrayals, near-death, escapes, and the discovery that the woman he had believed to be poor was in fact the secret heir to one of the most powerful underground philanthropic empires in all of West Africa, he finally felt strong enough to face what lay inside. With trembling hands, he unlatched the chest, and the aroma of old paper and something faintly sweet rushed out as dozens of handwritten letters spilled into his view letters Ama had written every year of their marriage, documenting how she used her vast wealth to quietly rescue girls from trafficking rings, build schools in remote regions, and fight corrupt land barons who had tried to force entire villages off ancestral grounds. And as Kwaku read, tears blurred his vision, because in each letter she wrote, but about him, how his kindness gave her courage, how his simplicity reminded her what true humanity looked like, how she hid her wealth because she wanted to be loved for her soul and not her fortune, and how she feared that revealing the truth would pull him into dangers he was never meant to face. Turning page after page, he felt a new kind of grief, painful but proud, because Ama had died protecting not her money but her legacy, and now that legacy had been placed entirely in his hands. At the bottom of the chest was a sealed envelope labeled "If anything ever happens to me," and inside it was a single gold key and instructions directing him to an isolated cliffside estate known only to a few of Ama's most trusted allies. A sanctuary she had built using her billions as a refuge for women and children escaping violent pasts. And as Kwaku made the journey through dense forests, red dirt roads, and narrow mountain paths, he could feel Ama's presence guiding him, almost as if she were walking beside him, smiling gently the way she always did when she hid a deeper truth behind her eyes. When he finally arrived, the towering gates opened automatically, as though recognizing him, and the caretakers greeted him with bowed heads. Calling him the chosen keeper, the title Ama had secretly assigned him long before her death. The estate was breathtaking gardens full of healing herbs, classrooms filled with laughing children, women rebuilding their lives with dignity and strength. And in that moment, Kweku realized that Ama's wealth had never been about luxury, but about power, the kind used to shape destinies, protect the weak, and punish those who preyed on them. Standing on the balcony overlooking the valley, he felt the heavy but noble weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. And for the first time he understood why Ama had chosen him, not because he was strong or wealthy, but because he had a heart that could carry a legacy built on compassion rather than ego, sacrifice instead of glory. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the sanctuary she created, Kweku whispered into the wind, "I will protect everything you built, Ama. I promise." And though the night was silent, he felt a soft, familiar breeze brush past him, like a final embrace from the woman he loved and finally understood, not a poor wife, nor just a secret billionaire, but a warrior of kindness whose greatest treasure was the world she saved in silence. And now that world belonged to him.